Hey, and welcome to episode 23 of Think Like a Hacker. We are in Berlin this week for WordCamp EU with Kathy Zant and Max Clavelli, who is standing behind the camera right there, along with Kerry and some other folks from our team are going to be joining us. We're really excited. We're doing the podcast from Berlin this week, so let's get going. All right, welcome to episode 23 of Think Like a Hacker. Again, we're in Berlin this week, and as I mentioned last week, we're asking folks to give us a good review on Apple Podcasts to help get the podcast out there. And Kathy, I think we got a couple of good reviews, right?
Yeah, we're getting some great reviews on Apple Podcasts, so thank you for that. Micah Daly actually reviewed us a little while ago and said that it is such a great show. I love this podcast. It's super interesting, super informative with a great format. Keep up the great work, Wordfence crew. So thank you, Micah. And if you review us on Apple Podcasts, we might review or read your review as well.
Wow, nice. Okay, so we're not completely messing it up, right?
We're hitting it. We're getting better. It's getting easier.
Better.
It's getting easier every episode, isn't it?
For sure. Yeah, my theory is that the beer that we're having here in Berlin is really going to help improve the quality of the show. But I think there's a point of diminishing returns, and it's about there. So
is it? Okay, well, we've got to get going.
Cheers. Okay, let's get cracking. So we got a pretty busy news week, and I guess the first story this week is the WordPress VIP outage, which was quite huge. I guess that hit Twitter pretty hard, eh?
It did. Well, there's so many large organizations that use WordPress VIP Go. And so this was definitely a topic of conversation at a couple of the meetups that I was at in Phoenix last week. But we don't really know what exactly happened. We just know that a number of major sites like Rolling Stone and TechCrunch were showing that beautiful succulent as a default.
Cactus or whatever it was, right?
Yeah, so all of these sites were defaulting to the default 2017 theme. And it was kind of a shocker to have all these sites change their theme, their look. So. Yeah,
that was really funky. It seemed like part of the infrastructure kind of fell offline, and so the sites reverted to the default theme. And as Kathy mentioned, we don't really know what happened there, but I guess some of the sites that went down were TechCrunch. I mean, that alone is huge. TechCrunch is massive.
Yes.
And 9 to 5 Mac, BBC America. Oh my goodness, Rolling Stone. 9 to 5 Google, VentureBeat, and Catalan covered the story on ZDNet, and he said that the total downtime was 3 hours. So not insignificant, and not sites that we've never heard of. In fact, some of the sort of cornerstone sites of the internet and of certain communities. So this is a big one, and I guess we're hoping that the VIP folks over at Automatic will come out with a post-mortem. I think that's what generally happens, right?
Yeah, definitely. But at the very least, we're sending hugs to the ops team
at
VIP.
We're sending hugs. We know you guys need hugs. We know that things happen, and we'll keep our eye on that. But moving on, so WordPress 5.2.2 squashed 13 bugs, and that came out, was it June 18 that it came out?
Yeah, it was during my jet lag, so I'm not exactly sure when it came out. I just oh my gosh, I hope my sites all update, right?
So this is not a security release. So it fixed 13 bugs, and it's work, and it's a decent amount of work that went into it, but nothing that seems super critical. I guess there was an enhancement to the site health feature that WordPress has now, and I think that came out in 5.2, so they've improved something there. And of course, as a reminder, Site Health will check for inactive themes and plugins, check for an out-of-date SQL server. It does several more checks, and it's a really helpful feature. So if you haven't checked that out, if you haven't taken a look at that, it was released in about 5.2. It was 5.2, right, Kathy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's really helpful. And 5.2.2, which just came out, has improved that a little bit. And then 5.2.2 included improvements to multisite as well, and that sort of, I'd like to go off on a bit of a tangent about that, if I may.
Please do.
Do you mind?
Not at all.
Okay. So speaking of multisite, this actually stems from a real-world incident response that we handled. A large customer which had a very public breach was running a very large multi-site installation, and we were the ones who confidentially handled the incident. And this was some time ago. It was a year or two ago, so nothing super recent, but it was in the press. You've heard about it. And our team did a great job of figuring out how the attackers got in and how they pivoted and so on. And one of the things that really struck me watching our team handle that breach was that if you can avoid running multi-site, then do so. Now I know multi-site is super useful for certain scenarios. If you want to have a single WordPress installation where a lot of administrators sign into that one installation and run a bunch of sites that has a central administrator that controls what themes and plugins they have access to. That's what multi-site does, and it is very appropriate for certain scenarios. But if you have a choice of having each site be its own WordPress installation or having each site run under multi-site, I would, as a security guy, I have a bias towards saying avoid multi-site, because it really is having all your eggs in one basket. Everything is a single WordPress installation. If one of those sites are compromised, and of course if you're running 1,500 sites, for example, you have to make a lot of themes and plugins available to each of those individual sites. It's a big attack surface. If one of them is compromised, you're hosed basically. All of the sites and all of the data on that entire installation is compromised. And so, what got me thinking about this was in handling this incident for this client. At the end of the process, we're like, okay, well, how do we make them more secure? How do we really lock this down? And our realistic recommendation was get off multi-site, but it was very difficult and very expensive for them to do that at that point. And so they didn't. But that's kind of where you end up. That's sort of the end state that you might end up in. And I really wanted to get your thoughts on this, Kathy, because you worked in our site cleaning team, our security services team, and you've seen this stuff hands-on. Where do you land on this?
I've also met a lot of major institutions, like universities, especially, with massive, we start calling them the massive multi-site, because you just have so many sites, so many different sites running off of one install. And all your eggs are in one basket, and so therefore your security game has to be top-notch. You have to know what you're doing. You have to watch for those commonly reused passwords, those types of things. It is only one installation of WordPress, so cleaning it isn't that bad when you're actually going in and cleaning it, because you're not cleaning 30 different sites, so it is a step up from, say, the 30 sites in a cPanel kind of problem. But you have to go through all of the different themes, and it affects when you have a breach and that site does go down, you're affecting so many public-facing sites, and that's where the trauma really comes in. So the clean isn't that difficult, but who you're affecting is really the problem there.
So it's kind of the attack surface on the one hand, right, that is huge, yes, because of the number of plugins and themes, and then the number of sites affected when one site takes the entire system down, right?
Right, exactly, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you are running multi-site and you're kind of way down the road and you've got, let's say, 5,000 sites and you have a massive attack surface, I have your solution right here to calm your nerves.
Definitely. Oh my gosh. I think I'll take a sip on that. And I'm trying not to drink too much of this. It's what, 9 in the morning? 9 in the morning.
For Berlin. For us Seattleites, it's, what is it, about midnight right now, I think?
Yeah, it is.
So, all right. So in other news, surprise, surprise, a disgruntled security firm has disclosed 0 days in 2 plugins. And, Kathy, just kind of a repeat on this, right? Groundhog Day, someone self-promoting.
Yeah.
By dropping Ode.
It's the same guy too, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the same guy. So so these are a couple of Facebook-owned plugins, it looks like. Messenger Customer Chat and Facebook for WooCommerce. One had about 20,000 installations, but the Facebook for WooCommerce had 200,000 installations, so it affected a large number. So these issues are fixed in Messenger Customer Chat. The fix is in for version 1.3, and Facebook for WooCommerce, the fix is in for 1.9.13. The problem with this is, again, we're having proof of concepts being published publicly. Hackers are catching wind of this, and they're watching this individual for more proof of concepts because they understand that this person has a motivation that is malicious, and they're looking for additional opportunities. So it's incredibly unfortunate that this is happening.
Right.
But these are only authenticated users, so it's not like
Yeah,
an
so
unauthenticated hack, right?
Yeah, so it's not as like critically scary as it might be, but it is kind of a big deal. And you know, between you, me, and our listeners, and I mean, you probably saw this on our internal Slack, right? Our threat intel team with Sean and the guys, saying that they're seeing the exact payload that was published in this guy's blog posts being used by attackers to compromise sites. So this is doing real damage, and you can see it happening if you're, doing what we do, where you're actually watching the payloads come in and compromise sites, or you're fixing hacked websites. Yeah. And you're looking at the logs, and you're looking at what payload was uploaded or what the query string was used. It's identical to the proof of concepts that this guy is using. That's exactly what attackers are using. They're just grabbing it, running with it, compromising sites, and doing damage. And so, this is obviously an exercise in self-promotion. It's trolling to draw attention to oneself and hopefully get backlinks by what any means necessary, and attention by any means necessary, and drum up some business. And I would say, if you are unhappy with what's happening here, just vote with your feet and with your wallet, and don't give us your business. Go and give it to Securi or SiteLock or whoever, or us, but just don't give it to that individual, because that is just not it's not cool, and it does real damage to the community. So, and
we don't say his name because we don't want to give him that publicity.
Well, it's Voldemort.
And
obviously.
Voldemort. And we keep calling him disgruntled security researcher, and I want to just call him disgruntled man, because he's just not a security researcher. He has no ethics whatsoever to be
And what's
doing
hilarious
this.
is he keeps saying we this, we that, but we know it's one guy. And I guess the press has finally said the team at so and so, but it's just one guy in a basement somewhere in Denver, I think he's based in.
Aurora, Colorado.
Is it Aurora?
Except when he comments on our blog posts, we traced his IP, and it's the Aurora Public Library. He's not even he's just so bizarre.
All right. Anyway, moving on. I think Pat Gray calls that a skateboarding dog story. It's more like a skateboarding dog researcher, but anyway.
It is.
So Google launched a Chrome extension to flag bad URLs to the safe browsing team. So yeah, do you want to run with this one?
Oh, the suspicious site reporter?
Okay, let me run with it, because I'm going to rant a little bit.
You're going to rant?
It's just a little bitty.
Okay.
Right? Just a little bitty.
I can
a fun
feel it
rant.
coming.
It's a fun rant. So Google launched a feature for Chrome which lets you report suspicious URLs to the Google Safe Browsing team. And it seems logical and exactly what they should be doing. And in my opinion, it is. And so it's pretty simple. It's a Chrome extension. You install it, and you can click a button if you're on a site that seems suspicious. You can report the site to the Google Safe Browsing team, and we'll call it the GSB for now. That's what we call the team and the API internally, the Google Safe Browsing list or API. And so you can report that to the GSB. They add it to their database, and I guess through some process, probably seeing how many folks report this particular URL, they'll add it to the GSB if it's looking legitimately suspicious. The spokesperson from Google said that if the site is added to the safe browsing list, you'll not only protect Chrome users, but users of other browsers and across the entire web. And that's from Emily Schechter, the Chrome product manager. Now, I kind of have two views on this. On the one hand, the GSB was a really great thing when they created it for the online community, for the web community. And it was also very efficient, the way they architected it, using hash prefixes and so on. I wrote our first integration with the GSB, and it's now on version 4 of that API. We're still running on version 2, and we're getting off using the GSB. And we've developed our own internal list of bad domains, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is that Google, in version 2 of the API, I think the number of API requests is either very high or it's unlimited. In version 4 of the API, it's limited to something like 10,000 requests a day, and our team implemented it, and they burned through that in 10 minutes. And so we got hold of Google and said, okay guys, we want to keep using this, we're adding data to it, we'd like to keep sourcing data from it. And the conversation immediately went to, okay, well, how much do you want to pay for it? And I'm not kidding. So what happened there was Ryan, one of our senior devs, jumped on a call with Google, and we had several collaborative conversations with them, and they made it clear that they were figuring out how to monetize the GSB, the Google Safe Browsing List. And the price that they threw out was, let me just check my notes here, I think it was 3 cents per request.
Wow.
Yeah, and Ryan did some math on that, and he said, okay, for if every site that uses Wordfence sends only a single request per day, that would cost us $60,000. And I think that's per month, yeah. And of course, every site that uses that feature sends way more requests per day, because what we're doing there is we're checking the URLs that are in your comments, the URLs that are in your source code, the URLs in your content, and seeing if any of them are on the Google Safe Browsing List. And so this feels a little bit disingenuous to me, because the way the GSB team and the Chrome team are positioning this is, if you do this, if you install the extension, you click it when you see a bad site, and you add this data, you're helping the whole online community. And again, the specific quote is, you're not only protecting Chrome users, but users of other browsers and across the entire web. And that's from Chrome's product manager. Well, the reality that we found is that Google was working with us very collaboratively, but to figure out how much we would pay to use this. And they went as far as sending us a survey which asks how many employees we have, what our annual revenue is, what do we spend on security data per year, what is the most that we would pay per month for the Safe Browsing Lookup API, and what is the most that we would pay per month for expedited submission of URLs to Google Safe Browsing and analyst support in case of verdict appeal. And you can read a lot into that last one, but there's a clear monetization strategy there. And this kind of ties in with the monetization of VirusTotal, for example, which is owned by Google. So it just feels like there's a little bit of I don't know if you can call it a conflict, but a little disconnect between Chrome wanting to be this sort of browser that is crowdsourcing data and making the web safer and making that data available to the rest of the web, and then the folks in the security team that are working to monetize that. And I think you kind of have to pick a lane here, right? Like, either source the data from folks, say to them the data is provided to everyone else and we're working to make the web safer, or make it clear that this is a commercial product with a commercial strategy, and that they're actually reselling the data to folks like us, Wordfence, who have an open source plugin used by over 3 million websites, where we're, the GSB, by the way, we don't charge for that. So, which would actually be unethical by the same logic, right? We're getting it for free from Google and then we're reselling it. Well, sure, then we should probably pay Google for it. But the reality is that actually this is available for all of our users in the open source version of Wordfence for over 3 million sites. And so it falls into that space of community driven, and the community benefits from it. So I would certainly like to see this conflict within Google resolved. So maybe Emily Schechter, the Chrome product manager, perhaps you could connect with the security team and say, hey guys, sounds like you're trying to charge for this. We're messaging it as this community thing to Chrome users. Let's try to figure out how to make that work together, right?
Yeah, make sure that the left hand and the right hand both know what each other are doing, and get on the same page.
Right, so, all right, but in other news, a Chrome extension was caught hijacking user search engine results, and this just came in, didn't it, in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, within the last, just this morning as I logged on after jet lag, to determine if we had any other stories happening, and Catalan was reporting this. This extension, it's a Chrome extension called YouTube Q, installed by 7,000 users, so not like a huge install base, but it looks to have been redirecting users' search engine results elsewhere, which is definitely a malware behavior. And users started noticing this, and reports surfaced on Reddit about 2 weeks ago. And this extension was removed from the web store on June 18th, so just a couple of days ago, after Microsoft Edge engineer and a former Google Chrome developer, Eric Lawrence, had pointed out on Twitter that the extension's search engine was hijacking. And the developer had sold this extension to someone else, so it very much looks like a supply chain type of attack.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Sounds very familiar. It's very interesting to me to see how Chrome extensions operate much like the plugin repository, where according to Catalan's article, there were a number of other Chrome developers who had commented over the past couple of years on Twitter that they had been approached with large sums of money being offered to purchase their Chrome extensions. And Google stated that 42% of all the malicious extensions that they had detected since January of last year were abusing Web Request API in one way or another, and this was doing it as well. So there seems to be some behavior in these Chrome extensions that is identifiable, and it makes them look attractive to malicious users, and so they purchase this. So this is basically just a PSA that if you do have Chrome extensions that you're using, you're basically giving them access to what you're doing within Chrome. So if you're accessing Google Docs, that Chrome extension can tell what you're doing sometimes. And so it's really important to make judicious decisions, not just with the plugins that you have in your WordPress site, but also what plugins you're plugging into your browser. It's much the same.
All right, well, I guess a very important thing that we didn't discuss, and this is a piece of data that our listeners are probably dying to know, and that is what kind of beer are we drinking here?
You bought it, I'm just drinking.
Well, it tastes pretty good, right?
It is excellent.
There's
yes.
something about German beer that is just, it just tastes so good and it's so drinkable, it's crazy. Anyway, this is a Paderberger Pilsner, and it's just what they call a session beer. It just kind of slips down a little too easy.
Yeah, a little too easy.
All right, well, so Troy is selling Have I Been Pwned. Did you hear about this?
I did hear about it.
Yeah.
What's the story?
Well, it's interesting. So the big announcement was on his blog, and he's calling it Project Svalbard, which is named after this project in the Arctic Circle where they archive a bunch of seeds, billions of seeds for the human race. I guess if there's a catastrophe, at least we've got the means to grow plants. And I don't quite follow the connection. I guess maybe it's that they've got a huge database full of, or a huge archive of seeds, and he's got a huge archive of own credentials. I think I prefer the seeds, but yeah. So Troy's been working with KPMG, and he's connected with them. And I think the blog post it's a really cool blog post. You know, it's kind of the history of Have I Been Pwned and so on. And he makes it clear that he has the best of intentions. But I think the strategy there is to set up a competitive bidding process for Have I Been Pwned. He wants to find a buyer for it. And as a reminder, Have I Been Pwned is a place where you can go to enter your email address, and it tells you if your email has been involved in a breach, and it gives you a list of the sites where the breach occurred. My understanding is that Troy is still a one-person team, and I think he's feeling very stressed. In his blog post, he says that he's considered growing the team, but it massively increases my responsibilities at a time where I really need to reduce the burden on me. As of today, I can't just switch off for a week, and frankly, if I tried even for a day, I'd be worried about missing something important. And you know, I got on Hacker News where they posted a link to this, and I posted a long comment about my thoughts on this. And I mean, on the one hand, I get where he's coming from. You know, Kerry and I, and of course Kerry's sitting behind me over there somewhere, but my co-founder and my wife, it took us a long time to build a business, and it was incredibly hard. And when you're kind of at those early stages, everything is on you, and ain't no one else going to do the work. It's all on you. Operations, coding, customer support, QA, business administration, legal. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on and on, right?
And then just hiring somebody to help you is like another
and that,
huge
yeah,
deal.
right. And then you have to learn about that. You have to learn
Yeah.
how to hire someone. But what very quickly happened to us once we had revenue, and I think that Have I Been Pwned is in a position now where it's generating revenue, is that once you bring on those first hires, you can hand off those tasks. And you know, I guess Harvard Business Review had primed me to not be the baker who doesn't want to get out of the kitchen, you know, and hand off those tasks very, very quickly. And so Matt Barry joined, and I handed off all dev to Matt, and it was a wonderful feeling. And I still had a lot to do, you know, operations, you know, QA, etc. But at that point I got it. There was kind of this epiphany there where, okay, well, we have the cash flow to support this. Let's build a team. And I got really good at delegating. You might have noticed, perhaps a little too good. But it's freed me up, and I have more free time now, much more than I did when it was just the two of us, kind of in hardcore entrepreneurial mode. And I don't know that Troy knows that could be a reality for him, and maybe he knows it on a sort of conscious, rational basis, but to be honest, when we had built the team, I realized I was burnt from that phase of just being the two of us and everything being on us and having to work incredibly long hours, and that sort of sense of it's all on you, buddy. And when I say it's all on you, it's all on me and Kerry. You know, we split it probably 50-50, but it took me a while for my blood pressure to return to normal. You know, it was pretty intense, and Troy is in that place now. And so coming from that place, looking at the business saying, well, I've got two paths, I can hand it over to someone else, you know, take a pile of cash and grow it, and then have them grow it and take that burden off my shoulders, or I can go the other route. I think it's very difficult when you're in that place of you know, that intense sort of one man entrepreneur or one person entrepreneurship, to be able to see objectively what that other vision might look like, the growing the team vision, right? And so, you know, I guess I find myself, I'm like, you know me, I'm a die-in-the-wool entrepreneur. And so like when Tony sold Securi, for example, and Tony, if you're watching this is a message to you, but I was disappointed because I was like, I watched, you know, a fellow entrepreneur, you know, go and become an employee, and with Troy, I'm seeing the same thing, you know, and that's just my very subjective point of view, but I love seeing, you know, people grow businesses and keep doing that, you know, and have that, you know, the freedom and everything else that comes with that. And so I was a bit disappointed when I read this, but it sounds like he's really made up his mind. He's got, he's doing it in a very sort of public and it seems quite ethical way. I think Have I Been Pwned will probably end up in you know, some good hands, hopefully. I think Troy is going to, you know, he says he's going to stay with Have I Been Pwned, but I think it's important to understand that when he sells it, he no longer controls it. And so, you know, he is an employee, and that business that presumably they'll pay, hopefully for Troy, quite a lot of money for, becomes their asset, their strategic asset, right?
And they get to make all the decisions of what's next for that product, which affects how many people? So many different people use this, and breaches aren't going away. Breaches keep getting worse as we report every week. So the project is needed by the community, by all of us, not just WordPress, but everyone who's online needs this project.
Yeah, and it's a sensitive one because you've got a massive collection of data breaches in a database, and so the data asset there is a little bit sensitive.
Yes.
And so that needs to end up in the right hands, and of course the users, the millions of users that have signed up for the service, or that you go and use the online version, want their data to end up in the right hands. So, you know, we'll see where it lands, but I can see Troy is doing his absolute best to smooth the transition, and he's got the best of intentions. And so hopefully it ends up in a good place, right?
Yeah, I think it will. I hope it will. I think it's a very important project, and it's interesting to me that when I go to meetups or I go to WordCamps and I talk about, you know, how we use it in our service, how many people aren't even aware that this exists. We hear about breaches every day, and so many people don't know about Have I Been Pwned and how important it is and how useful.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like a utility in a sense, right? It's something that a government should provide, but I have absolutely no doubt that if they attempt to do that, they'll completely screw it up.
No, what makes you think that?
I don't know, the fact that I have to wait for a long time when I go to the DMV. Okay, let me not get too cynical, but yeah, I think that he's become an important public resource. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really hope it ends up in the right hands.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Did you hear about this Firefox 0-day that's being exploited in the wild? That's kind of scary.
Well, I did. What's going on there?
Yeah, this was on The Verge, but I've seen it on so many news sources over the past few days, on June 18th. So version 67.0.3 or Firefox ESR 60.7.1 have a 0-day vulnerability, and they've seen attacks in the wild. So this, from the Firefox team, they said a type confusion vulnerability can occur when manipulating JavaScript objects due to issues in array.pop. This can allow for an exploitable crash, and they're aware of targeted attacks in the wild abusing this flaw. So all you need to do is restart Firefox and you're safe. So just a PSA to make sure your Firefox gets restarted and you'll be safe.
Awesome. And as long as you are above version 67.0.3 or Firefox ESR 60.7.1, as long as you're above that, when you restart your browser, then presumably you'll be okay for a while until the next O-Day drops. Until the next one.
Always an O-Day somewhere.
So Philly, huh?
Well, let's just add them to a long line of municipalities that have been ransomware attacked. So this was reported by The Verge on June 11th, and since May 21st, a virus has shut down Philadelphia's online court system, bringing network access to a standstill. The courts attributed this problem to malware discovered on a limited number of computers, which caused them to shut down the system as a precaution. So this has affected people's ability to physically visit courts to file documents. Lawyers are having to use paper, and reduce the hours during which documents can be accepted. But details on what exactly is happening here have been scant. But it's just another situation. And we had a news story pop up this morning about a city in Florida. Mark, did you see that one?
Yeah, this is really interesting because I think that there's been a series. So a couple of there's been a couple of incidents where folks have paid to get rid of ransomware, but the default seems to not pay. The default seems to be where people don't pay.
And what happens there?
Right. I mean, they don't get their data back, and it costs them a huge amount of money, and so on. And I mean, this is counterintuitive, but I hate to say this, right? But if you pay the attacker, if you're infected with ransomware, you get your data back, you're back online, and you're back in business.
Right.
And I hate that this extortion scheme works. I mean, it works for the attacker, and I mean, obviously it sucks that you're hit by this, but paying seems to be the safest and most effective course of action.
Yeah.
And in fact, there was a story a week or two ago, right, where a security firm that was claiming to be able to remediate ransomware was caught actually just paying the attackers.
Yeah, we reported that one.
We recovered that, right?
Yeah.
And so, this is Riviera Beach City Council voted unanimously this week to pay the hackers' demands, believing the Palm Beach suburb had no choice if it wanted to retrieve its records, which the hackers encrypted. The council already voted to spend almost $1 million on new computers and hardware after hackers captured the city's system 3 weeks ago. And apparently, I guess the vector here was phishing.
Yeah, it looks that way. It looks like they got into the systems when an employee clicked on an email link, allowing them to upload malware.
Yeah, and I think this really highlights the need for red team exercises. Yeah. You know, our Director of Information Security runs red team exercises on us, and regularly she will try to spearfish us.
Yes. We live in a constant state of paranoia.
Yeah, thanks Colette. Cheers. We'll get you. We'll see you at DEF CON.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's why it's important to run those exercises on your team. And in this case, they were caught with either a phishing or spear phishing attack. All they're saying is that an employee clicked on an email link that allowed the attacker to upload malware. And the city's had numerous problems, including losing its email system and 911 dispatchers not being able to enter calls into the computer, which is pretty bad. You know, often you'll see these attacks will say, oh, it didn't affect 911, but this one actually did.
Yeah. Which just elevates it to when health and safety is involved. It elevates it to a new level of DEFCON level 5 or whatever, right?
It's either 1 or 5, I forget which is it.
Yeah, I can't remember. Probably 1.
Yeah. All right, so interesting story there. And again, I hate that is the most effective way to deal with this, but...
Well, the most effective way is to have a good cybersecurity budget now, before it affects your municipality.
Agreed.
To run those red team exercises, to train your people to not click on links in emails, and to have systems that prevent this kind of access. Again, cybersecurity dollars are best spent before you need to spend them.
Sing it from the mountain, sister.
Woo!
Exactly. So here's an interesting one. House lawmakers demand the end to warrantless surveillance.
Yeah, TechCrunch reported this just a couple of days ago. They're actually proposing a constitutional amendment to defund data collection programs run by the NSA, the National Security Agency. In 2018, 9,600 warrantless searches of Americans' communications happened, which was up 28% year over year. They want them to ensure that they are not knowingly collecting communications from Americans like emails, messages, browsing data. Representatives Justin Amash and Zoe Lofgren have garnered support from many civil liberties unions like the EFF and ACLU. The NSA is using their Section 702 powers to collect information from foreign nationals, but obviously we are Americans in a foreign place, so are we Americans who shouldn't be surveilled, or are we foreign people who should be? There's a lot of gray areas, and they're basically asking to ensure that this is better clarified and that they are taking greater steps to protect Americans from unlawful search and seizure, which we are protected from with the Fourth Amendment, right?
Yeah, so we get to listen to everyone else around the world, but we don't get to listen to our own people. I think it's the message there. But this has been something that's been going on for, oh my goodness, since the 90s, I would say, where the NSA's mandate is that they are allowed to do SIGINT, signals intelligence, on the rest of the world. Yeah. They're not allowed to spy on their own citizens. And that has been in place for a very long time, since the 1990s at least, and I think perhaps from quite a bit before then. Well, post September 11th, the boundaries started getting blurred, and there was a lot of public interest in catching the bad guys, because there was a very clear and public demonstration live on CNN of what the bad guys can do if they attack us. And so new laws were passed, like the Patriot Act, which enabled more domestic surveillance, and now this is the ACLU, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, FreedomWorks, New America, and the Sunlight Foundation are trying to they're constantly working to roll this back, and this is some progress in that direction to get NSA to really stick to their original mandate, which is spy on other countries, spy on bad guys, don't spy on our own citizens. Now, I got to just make it clear. I mean, I'm an immigrant to the U.S. I'm South African originally, and I've lived in a lot of other countries. We're in Berlin right now. I don't particularly like this thing of American exceptionalism, where we are somehow better or excluded from certain things, and those other people outside of the country, the non-Americans, are not excluded, and we can surveil them. But I guess that's the way of the world. So anyway, some movement in that direction from NSA, hopefully. But in other news, there was a data breach. Evite experienced a data breach, and this is not drop everything and run and tell your friends kind of story, but there's an interesting lesson here. So Evite had a data breach. What happened is someone seemed to leave a backup file lying around. The data that was in there was from 2013 or before. It included names, usernames, email addresses, passwords, and if optionally provided to Evite, dates of birth, phone numbers, and mailing addresses. The data was contained in, quote, an inactive storage file. And I guess the lesson here is don't leave your backups lying around. Treat your backup files, and this is, I'm really talking to our WordPress community about this. I think that there's a lot of backup software where I've seen, and you've seen, I see your eyes rolling a little bit over there, where you've seen, they'll zip up the entire kind of WordPress structure and then leave it in a directory, and sometimes that directory becomes publicly accessible. Well, the thing about backups is you have to treat it, you have to secure them the same way you do your production data, or you end up in the boat that Evite's in. Even if it's a very old backup, it is still critical to secure it. And so, as you're listening to this, just, start a background thread processing in your brain saying, well, where did I leave those backups? Are they in a secure place? Are they completely offline? Or are they maybe in a directory that could be publicly accessible if my server is misconfigured, and maybe I should do a better job of securing them? So that's really why I wanted to include that story.
And if you're putting them on S3 buckets, make sure your privacy settings are set appropriately and that they're not set to public. I know a lot of people put data there because you're only charged by transfer, you're not charged by what's stored there, I believe, on Amazon. And so therefore people put a lot of backups on Amazon, on AWS. And so if you are putting stuff there, make sure that you lock it down, because we've seen some breaches happening with stuff stored on.
Yeah, we've seen a ton of breaches reported. I think in and outside the WordPress space, where it was an S3 bucket that was left open or with credentials that were compromised. But yeah, in other news, the Telegram CEO is saying that China's behind a DDoS attack that targeted them, eh?
Right. Do you use Telegram at all? Have you used it?
No, I don't.
Okay, so Telegram is a messaging service. It started in Russia. They moved their headquarters to Berlin, but then moved it to Dubai. This is according to the Wikipedia page. I'm researching so well. But anyway, it's a messaging app where it's encrypted, and so security is touted as being very adhered to there, but it can also be used as channels, much like a Twitter feed can be done. So I know that a number of people are starting to use this as a broadcast mechanism. In China, there's a lot of political unrest around Hong Kong. And there were some protests taking to the streets in Hong Kong in last week, opposing Beijing's plan to allow extraditions from the city, which is designated, it was once at one time a British colony.
Protectorate, I think is
Protectorate,
the term.
yes.
Yeah.
And now it is Chinese Special Administrative Region, or an SAR. And so these protests, they're saying that they were using Telegram to communicate what was happening with the protests. Coincidentally, there was a DDoS attack on the Telegram servers, and they are reporting that this was instigated somehow by the Chinese government to shut down. This is the story that the CEO of Telegram is using. But I find it very interesting that, you know, no matter where people need to communicate, they'll find a channel. They'll find some kind of method of communicating, and governments are going to follow them. So I found that this, you know, an interesting story, just a new social network that is popping up, and how people are using it, not only to communicate, but also communicate about their political activities.
Yeah, and I think the underlying story there is super interesting for me. You know, so if I recall correctly, Hong Kong was handed over by the British to the Chinese, and this was in late 90s, early 2000s, and they said that they would not change anything for the next 50 years. Yeah. And so Hong Kong would remain an autonomous region and have its own trade rules and its own sort of mini constitution and its own set of laws. And what Hong Kong is trying to do is implement a new set of laws that include an extradition treaty that would allow China to extradite anyone that they want from Hong Kong to face trial in China. And you know, it's pretty obvious why, if you're saying, well, Hong Kong is totally autonomous and it has its own set of laws, why that's problematic, because it makes it very much part of China from a legal perspective, right? The big sort of mothership at any time can kind of reach in and say, well, we don't like you, come on over here and let's decide if you need to go to jail or not. And so there's massive protests around that, and I think it's because the folks in Hong Kong are smart enough to realize that this is a watershed moment. It is the moment where Hong Kong ceases to be truly independent. Yes. And so the protests that they're coordinating with Telegram are kind of around that. And you know, attribution is hard, right? And so, you know, Durov, the CEO of Telegram, is saying that they're being targeted by the Chinese government and so on. It's very hard to prove that, but logically it just seems to me that that has to be the case. And of course, China has a very good cyber army, essentially. They have the capability to do this, and they have the motivation. What is the thing with crime? It's like means, motive, and opportunity, something like that, right? Yeah. So I guess they have all of those things in place. Right. But anyway, interesting to see that unfold, and we'll see what happens there. But in other news, Evernote has an XSS flaw that puts the personal data of millions at risk. Did you read about this, Kathy?
Yeah, I did. I saw that. I know. Actually heard about it at a meetup because people were asking me what they should do about Evernote, and I didn't even know the story yet, so I had to read up on it. So there's something called the Evernote web clipper, and this was found to be exploitable with a cross-site scripting attack due to an error that could allow malicious actors to bypass Chrome's same origin policy, meaning that everything's coming from the same place. Web Clipper has been downloaded 4.6 million times, so it does have sort of a wide use. If you update to the latest version, which is 7.1.11.1 or above, it'll protect you. So this is sort of another public service announcement to that. If you do use Evernote and you're using the Web Clipper, to make sure that you update. The cool thing about this story is that the security researcher disclosed it to them, and they fixed it within 4 days. So, and Evernote has this cool page on their site that they call their Security Hall of Fame, which I think is awesome, because we've had many instances in the past in the security research where a security researcher will report a bug, report a vulnerability, and they kind of get harassed by the company that has that vulnerability, saying, our system, we take the utmost pride, security is so important to us, and they kind of push off the security researcher or even threaten that security researcher who is reporting the vulnerability. And Evernote takes a different take. They're like, you reported a bug to us that we can fix, and we fixed it. Dude, you are on our Security Hall of Fame. So they really make security important, and this is sort of a hallmark to a company that you would want to do business with, because they are showing that security is important to them, that they value the security community that's reporting bugs and vulnerabilities to them. And that was my cool favorite thing about this article.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I haven't seen this from Evernote, and I just was checking out the page as you were chatting, and it looks like they've got about 20 researchers on there from 2018, and maybe about 10 or 12 from 2019 already. And I guess security goes both ways, right? You've got ethical and unethical researchers, and we chatted a little bit about that earlier in this episode. And then the same with companies. You know, you've got companies that kind of take they have a lot of animosity towards researchers, and they take an antagonistic stance. And then you've got companies like Evernote that understand that there's good work that's happening out there. There's an opportunity for them to become more secure by collaborating with a researcher, and they celebrate that, and they celebrate it on this Hall of Fame page, which is pretty epic. It's evernote.com/security/report-issue if you want to check that out, but we'll put it in the show notes. And I mean, that is a feel-good story. I'm tempted to leave it there, but just a quick note for our ops teams working for hosting providers. There is multiple Linux and FreeBSD denial of service vulnerabilities were found by Netflix in some research that they did, and this is really the TCP/IP networking stack. And the TLDR there is just upgrade your Linux kernel to fix these vulnerabilities, and it affects FreeBSD as well. I'm not going to get too technical on this, but it basically affects the, it allows attackers to trigger the kernel panic in vulnerable systems. Netflix information security researcher Jonathan Looney found these 3 Linux vulnerabilities. 2 of the vulnerabilities are related to the minimum segment size, or MSS, and the TCP selective acknowledgement capabilities. One vulnerability is related only to MSS. The most serious one is named SAC Panic, so you can Google that, SACK space panic, and that causes affected systems to panic and reboot. So definitely read up on that. We'll post a link in the show notes. Looks like Catalin's covering it on Bleeping Computer, on ZDNet. He doesn't work for Bleeping Computer anymore. And Bleeping Computer is also covering it. I'm assuming that's Lawrence, who replaced Catalin. And we'll post those links in the show notes. But that's it for this week's news. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe, or leave us a comment. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, give us a rating to let us know how we're doing. And as Kathy mentioned last week, if you leave us a review, we may read your review on air. And we'll be airing our next interview later this week, so stay tuned for that. And have a wonderful week from WordCamp EU in Berlin. Bye, everyone.